He came to America with no money, no English, and a fighting record that didn't even count. He worked construction to survive. He's lost his first 2 UFC fights under circumstances so brutal and unfair that even his coaches were furious. And when he finally climbed to the top of the division, he refused to take the shortcut that was right in front of him, fighting his best friend for the belt. Most people would have folded long before any of that. Morab Dvalishvili didn't even flinch. Before any of this, there was Georgia. Not the peach state, the small, ancient country sandwiched between Russia and the rest of the Caucasus. A place that has spent centuries fighting to simply exist. Morab grew up in a village there during one of the most turbulent stretches in the country's modern history. Russia occupied 20% of Georgian territory. Bombs were dropped in the capital. People he knew, family, mutual friends, didn't survive it. He watched all of it as a teenager. What came after wasn't much easier. The economy collapsed. Electricity vanished. Gas ran out. With no infrastructure and no jobs, crime became the only industry left standing. Morab was at an age where the choice in front of him was real: become part of that world or find something else to hold on to. His parents worked, grinded, and showed him what hard work looked like when everything around you is falling apart. That example, combined with judo, which he started at 6 or 7 years old, gave him a direction. He became a serious competitor. Georgian youth championships, sambo, judo tournaments. He dominated them. By the time he started MMA in 2010, he'd already built the foundation of what would become one of the most relentless fighting styles the sport has ever seen. He racked up 10 fights in Georgia, won them all, and decided America was next. But there was a problem nobody told him about until it was too late. When Morab landed in New York City in 2012, he was carrying everything that Georgia had given him: the toughness, the work ethic, the judo, the wins. What he didn't have was English, or money, or a professional record, as it turned out. The Georgian promotion he'd competed in wasn't recognized as professional by American standards. So every single one of those 10 victories was wiped off the books. He had to start from scratch. And then it got stranger. The gym that picked him up didn't book him for MMA fights. They booked him for boxing. 4 times. Then to kickboxing matches. Morab, a wrestler and judo specialist, spent his first year in the United States doing a sport he never intended to compete in professionally. He won all 6. Not because he was a boxer. He knew he wasn't. But because he was in incredible shape and simply refused to lose. That's who he was. But it was a year wasted, a year off course. Eventually, he got his first proper MMA fight. He lost. It was a close fight against a more experienced opponent, and the result shook him. He went back and got a win 8 months later. Then, less than 2 months after that, he took a short-notice fight he wasn't ready for. Lost again. 2 losses, 1 win, and Morab was already staring down the possibility that maybe this dream had a ceiling. He was alone in a city he barely understood, fighting at local shows, doing construction full-time just to keep the lights on. He trained after work. He couldn't dedicate himself the way the sport demanded. Every day felt like running uphill. Then he found the Sarongo team, and everything changed. Matt Serra and Ray Longo's gym in New York has produced champions and contenders for years. But what it gave Morab wasn't just technique or strategy. It gave him a place to belong. He'd left his actual family, his language, his country, and every friend he'd ever made back in Georgia. Walking into that gym felt, by his own description, like finding a family. He trained harder than anyone. After practice, when everyone else was heading to the showers, Morab would get on the treadmill for another hour. His teammates noticed. They couldn't believe his conditioning. They fed off it. And it was there, in that gym, that he met Aljamain Sterling. Sterling was already an elite-level competitor by the time Morab sparred him for the first time. Morab had just done 3 hard rounds with someone else and stepped in, probably feeling confident. Aljo took him down, choked him. 3 times. In 10 minutes. Morab had never experienced anything like it. He walked out of that session knowing he had a long way to go, but also knowing exactly what he had to work toward. What happened next wasn't just a training partnership. These two became genuine brothers. They pushed each other, supported each other, and eventually became neighbors in Las Vegas. Aljo would later say that when he really needed help, Morab offered him money, not a small amount, real money, and refused to take it back. Morab would say that without Aljo, he'd probably be fighting in a smaller promotion somewhere. Their friendship wasn't for the cameras. It was the real thing, and it would become one of the most tested relationships in UFC history. After finding the Sierlongo team, Morab went on a 5-fight winning streak and became the Ring of Combat bantamweight champion. Dana White was watching. He was scouting another fighter at Morab's first title defense. What he saw instead was a backfist knockout that changed Morab's life. He was in the UFC. His first fight was against Frankie Scenes. Morab was sick, flu, the kind that makes your whole body feel like wet cement. He didn't pull out of the fight. His coaches knew he shouldn't have competed. By the end of it, everyone in his corner believed he'd won. The judges gave it 2 scenes. Starting his UFC career 0-1 with half his purse gone was brutal. But what came next was somehow even worse. His second fight was against Ricky Simon. Morab was winning. He dropped Simon. He was controlling the fight. With about a minute left in the final round, he took Simon down, and in the scramble, his head hit the canvas. He knocked himself out on the mat while his opponent was beneath him. What followed was one of the most bizarre sequences in UFC history. Morab, clearly unconscious by any reasonable measure, somehow kept moving. His legs kicked. His eyes stayed open. The referee, in one of the sport's most criticized non-calls, let it continue. The horn sounded. Morab survived. And then the judges gave the fight to Simon because the referee hadn't stopped it. The unconscious period didn't count in the scoring. The doctor who checked Morab after the fight reported that his first question was, "What happened?" He had no memory of the final minute. He had been out. Everyone knew it. The promotion gave him a Fight of the Night bonus, $50,000. It was the most money he'd ever seen. He took a vacation, gave money to his brothers, tipped his coaches, paid his manager, bought a car. And 6 months later, went back to construction. He hadn't even accounted for taxes. 0-2 in the UFC. Working construction, fighting for his career. What happened next doesn't have a lot of highlight footage, but the results speak for themselves. Fight in Moscow, dominant performance. 2 rounds of total control. Then another win. Then another. The losses stopped. The cardio, already superhuman, became his signature weapon. He didn't just outwork opponents. He wore them down so systematically that by the 3rd round, they were running on empty while Morab was somehow getting stronger. His coaches started calling him the Machine, not as a nickname, as a description. He set records for takedowns in the bantamweight division. He set records for control time. He pushed the pace from the first second of every fight, never broke, never faded. Opposing coaches watched tape trying to find a flaw and couldn't identify one. The only thing they could agree on was that you needed to hurt him badly and early, because once the fight got to the later rounds, it was over. By the time he'd climbed to the top 15, he'd been calling out one specific opponent for 3 years, Sean O'Malley. Nobody seemed to be paying much attention to that call-out. Nobody was paying much attention to Morab at all, really. He was ranked, but not celebrated. He was winning, but not famous. And he was perfectly okay with that, because his focus wasn't on recognition. It was on winning. And his best friend was about to become the most talked-about fighter in the division. Aljamain Sterling got the bantamweight title in one of the most controversial moments in UFC history. Petr Yan, who was winning the fight convincingly, landed an illegal knee on a downed Sterling in the 4th round. He was disqualified. Aljo was crowned champion without finishing a round. The fans were merciless. Aljo was hated by a large portion of the fan base almost overnight. And Sterling's team, celebrating the way they did, only poured fuel on it. Morab didn't hesitate for a second. His best friend was the champion. That was the end of the conversation. But it created an enormous complication for the division, because now there was a mandatory rematch. The title picture was a mess. And Morab, who had been climbing steadily and probably deserved a title shot already, was stuck waiting. He didn't complain. he kept winning. What came next was a stretch of fights that proved Morab didn't just belong in title conversations. He was ready to beat the best fighters in the world. Jose Aldo, one of the most decorated champions the sport has ever seen, couldn't handle the pace. Morab didn't try to take him down. He pressed forward, used his conditioning, and outlasted a legend. Petr Yan, the man who cost Aljo his dignity in the title fight and had disrespected Morab and Sterling personally at a hotel years earlier, was next. That one was personal. Georgia versus Russia. Morab had said privately that he had two options in that fight: win or not go home. He dominated Yan from the first, second, to the last. Henry Cejudo, two-division champion, Olympic gold medalist, was supposed to be a genuine threat. Morab walked him around the octagon, attempted a choke in front of Mark Zuckerberg, apparently kissed his opponent's back at some point just to enjoy the moment, and won by decision. The division was on notice. 3 former champions beaten. The #1 contender spot was his, and his best friend was still champion. Every interview, every press conference, every podcast, the same question: when are you going to fight Aljo? The answer never changed. They were brothers. They lived across the street from each other in Las Vegas. They sparred together the morning of Morab's fights just to warm up. They went to Jamaica together to work with underprivileged youth. The UFC made it clear this was not the direction they preferred. Dana White said directly that if you're not willing to find out who the best in the world is, this is not the place for you. Morab didn't budge. He cost himself years. He waited through 2 more of Aljo's title defenses, fighting additional opponents, putting in additional wear on his body, eating the criticism from every pundit and analyst who thought he was being foolish. And some of them weren't wrong, strictly from a career standpoint. He was leaving money on the table. He was letting time pass. A fighter's window isn't forever. But the machine wasn't built to take shortcuts. When the belt finally became available after, Aljo lost it to Sean O'Malley and began planning a move up to featherweight. Morab had his moment. Not handed to him, earned. Through 11 consecutive wins, through 3 former champions, through construction sites and brutal weight cuts, into stolen victories at the beginning of his career, through a friendship that cost him more than anyone will ever fully know. The Sphere in Las Vegas, one of the most visually spectacular events the UFC has ever staged. Morab versus O'Malley for the undisputed bantamweight title. Sean O'Malley had legitimate punching power in elite boxing. He was longer, more dangerous on the feet, and came in as the favorite. He'd knocked out Aljo to win the title. He believed, publicly and loudly, that Morab's wrestling wouldn't be enough, and that he'd be able to keep him at range and pick him apart. His corner spent the early rounds yelling instructions to Ward. Morab's corner to mess with their communication, a rules-legal but universally criticized tactic, that said. Everything about how rattled the champion already was. Morab didn't do anything new. He did everything. He walked through punches, closed distance, got hurt, got up, found takedowns, imposed his will, and ground O'Malley down across 5 rounds. By the final round, Morab was landing body kicks that visibly buckled the champion. O'Malley survived but didn't compete. The decision was dominant. The scorecards were red. Morab Dvalishvili, the new undisputed UFC bantamweight champion of the world. The first Georgian-born UFC champion in history. He danced, he cried, he called his mother. He went home to Georgia and was met by crowds who treated him like a head of state. Everyone wanted to touch him, take a photo, say something. He was the same man he'd always been, the construction worker from the village, just in a different uniform. Becoming champion wasn't enough for Morab. He immediately started talking about 4 title defenses in a single calendar year, something that had never been done in UFC history. The record was 3. He wanted 4. The UFC agreed to accommodate it. He submitted O'Malley in a rematch. He then handled Umar Nurmagomedov, who'd come in as a heavy favorite, called Morab, a fake champion on social media. and carried himself with the kind of arrogance that Morab found genuinely offensive. Morab was dealing with a serious staph infection going into that fight, had 26 stitches in his leg, and was on antibiotics during camp. He lost the first 2 rounds. Then in round 3, something shifted. The pace increased. Umar started to wilt. By the championship rounds, Morab had broken GSP's all-time takedown record and was grinding a previously undefeated contender into the canvas. He won a convincing decision that multiple analysts called the best 135-pound title fight in the sport's history. He then beat Corey Sandhagen, an elite striker, a genuine top 5 fighter, so thoroughly that Sandhagen barely won a single round on any card. Arsha takedowns, 38 takedown attempts. Morab shot for a finish, didn't get it, and didn't care, because the win was never in doubt. 3 title defenses. 1 to go. The 4th was against Petr Yan again. Quick turnaround. Morab had been cutting weight the hard way, starving himself, sweating it off, passing out twice during the process for every single one of these defenses. For title fights in less than 12 months will take something from any human being, no matter how much cardio they have. And Yan, who had spent an entire year thinking about nothing except this rematch, came in with the best performance of his career. He was sharper, more disciplined, better. Morab took damage he hadn't taken in any previous fight. He was visibly hurt at moments he'd previously shrugged off. He couldn't impose his game the way he had in the first 3 defenses. He lost. The streak ended at 15. Morab walked out of the cage and thanked the crowd. No excuses. No complaints. He said Yan was better that night, and that was it. The bantamweight GOAT conversation is genuinely difficult. Dominic Cruz built a dynasty. Aljo Sterling's title reign had its own complexities, but Morab's resume, the records for takedowns and control time, the wins over Aldo, Yan twice, Sudo O'Malley twice, Nurmagomedov, Sandhagen, is the most complete the division has ever seen. The frustrating part, as his coaches and teammates have noted, is that Morab might have 6 or 7 defenses if he'd gotten his shot when he deserved it. Years were lost. Career prime was spent fighting additional contenders while waiting for his best friend's title situation to resolve. He chose the friendship. He paid for it. And he never once acted like it was a sacrifice, because to him, it wasn't. Came here with nothing, no dollar to his name, no language. A professional record that had been erased before he threw his first legitimate punch on American soil. He worked construction. He got robbed in his first 2 UFC fights. He watched his best friend hold a belt that should have been his for years. And he showed up every single day and helped that friend prepare to defend it. And in the end, he became champion. He made history. He kept his friend. He went home to Georgia as a hero. He got more money than that 20-year-old framing windows in New York could have ever imagined. The machine got it all. And he said he wouldn't change a single thing.